Good evening, I'm Maham Tawa with the news-making headlines around the world. The State of Kuwait marks the 53rd anniversary of independence, remembering the day Kuwait gained full sovereignty. Saudi Foreign Minister Saud al-Faisal says the outbreak of violence in Iraq is a consequence of the Syrian civil war. The UNHCR calls on the international community to have compassion and solidarity towards Syrian refugees and the countries hosting them. And King Philippe VI is proclaimed Spain's head of state in a ceremony in the Spanish Parliament. In our first item, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Majesty King Philippe VI on the occasion of his accession to the throne of the Kingdom of Spain, wishing him all the best of luck and success. His Highness praised the existing distinguished relations between Kuwait and Spain. His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Majesty King Philippe VI on the occasion of his accession to the throne of the Kingdom of Spain. And His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al-Mbarak Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, the Prime Minister, also sent a similar cable. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Excellency President Juan Manuel Santos of the Republic of Colombia on his re-election for a new term as President of that friendly country. His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Excellency President Juan Manuel Santos of the Republic of Colombia on his re-election for a new term as President of that friendly country. His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al-Mbarak Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, the Prime Minister, also sent a similar cable. His Excellency, the Deputy Premier and Minister of Interior and Acting Minister of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs, Sheikh Mohammed Al-Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, accompanied by the Acting Interior Undersecretary Major General Mahmoud Al-Dosari and a number of Assistant Undersecretaries and senior officials, inspected today the executive centers in the General Directorate of Operations at the Ministry of Interior. The Deputy Premier and Minister of Interior began his inspection tour by visiting the Emergency Telephone 112 Operation Room. He was briefed by Brigadier Khalid Ahmed bin Salama about the way in which the security men respond to calls and deal efficiently with the needs of the citizens. The Deputy Premier and Minister of Interior discussed with the officials the obstacles and challenges they face in their attempts to respond to the emergency calls. He expressed satisfaction at the mechanism being followed by the staff of the emergency telephone calls and commended their dedication to this important service, both to the country's security as well as to the welfare of society. He also expressed hope that the services catered by this operations center would be increased in quality and quantity through intensive training and improving the skills and capability of the staff in order to make this service more effective. The Deputy Premier and Minister of Interior then held a meeting with the Emergency Directorate officials, which was also attended by the Assistant Undersecretaries and the Directors of the Governorate's security departments and other relevant security officials. They briefed His Excellency on the preparations which are being made to secure the upcoming by-elections. They also briefed him on the arrangements they are planning during the holy month of Ramadan and the summer season. The State of Kuwait marks the 53rd independence anniversary today, recalling the day, June 19th of 1961, when the country declared full autonomy and sovereignty over its territory after a period of being a British protectorate. The document stating an end of protectorate status was signed by the chief British political president in the Arabian Gulf Presidency, Sir George Humphrey Middleton, and late Emir Sheikh Abdullah Salim Al-Sabah, who was fondly dubbed Father of the Constitution by his people in recognition of the many key achievements during his reign. The atmosphere in Kuwait was leading in the direction of this development since the start of Sheikh Abdullah Salim's reign as the 11th Emir in 1950. Kuwaitis are still most proud of Sheikh Abdullah Salim for his efforts leading to the drafting and adoption of the state's constitution in November 11, 1962. In recognition of many accomplishments and in a token of love of their leader, Kuwaitis chose to officially celebrate independence on the same day Sheikh Abdullah Salam al-Subah assumed post of Emir in 1950, and Independence Day was marked on February the 25th ever since. The Ministers of Labour from the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, held their first ministerial committee meeting under the chairmanship of Kuwaiti Minister of Social Affairs and Labour and Minister of State for Planning and Development, Dr. Hind al-Sabih, and with the attendance of GCC Secretary General, Dr. Abdul Latif al-Zayani. The meeting focused on the policies of joint cooperation to further deepen integration, coordination and cohesion between all member states. The ministerial committee is also tasked with following up on the implementation of resolutions adopted by the GCC Supreme Council, together with the approval of a single charter as a regulative framework for the committee's work. Sarah Farris Group has more on the meeting in this report from the Kuwait Sheraton Hotel.
The first committee meeting of Ministers of Labour in the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC states, kicked off with discussions focusing on a host of issues, including the manpower and labour sector in the GCC countries.
We're meeting to follow up on the implementations of the recommendations and resolutions that were adopted during the 127th session of the GCC Ministerial Council, which was held in Jeddah on June 2, 2013, and which saw the formation of a ministerial committee tasked with coordinating all labor issues among the GCC countries to achieve joint cooperation. The main issues that will be discussed include boosting the percentage of GCC nationals in the labor market, especially in the private sector, and improving manpower in the GCC countries by means of training personnel.
This meeting comes as an implementation to the decision taken by the Ministerial Council. The Ministerial Council for the GCC is the committee or the council of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, who took the decision to form a committee at the ministerial level for the social affairs and for the labor, Ministers of Labor. Of course, they used to meet almost biannually. Or sometimes annually, and that meeting used to take place started even before the GCC was established.
The meeting's agenda included several weighty issues and topics, mainly suggestions to turn GCC pilot systems and laws into national ones.
Today is an historical meeting for the GCC Ministerial Committee for Social Affairs or Social Development, and we were pleased that today we discussed together many of the issues that were of concern to our leaders in the GCC and how we can implement them into very productive programs that can help the GCC people.
We look forward to discuss matters of joint interest and matters of labor, matters of for expats, laborers in the GCC, and the policies that are treated here by the countries in the GCC towards expat laborers, as well as the international cooperation with International Labour Organization, where we all are members and active members of that organization.
Still, the proposal for the decisions or the resolutions, among them I can say that something related to create a new committee within the GCC General Secretariat to discuss how to develop the Executive Council for the Ministers of Labour and Social Affairs.
The meeting was held in line with the resolution that was issued following the GCC Ministerial Council meeting in Jeddah in June 2013 to set up 4 ministerial committees in the fields of health, education, labour and social affairs in order to promote and develop inter-Gulf cooperation in all fields. Their Excellencies, the Ministers of Labour from the Gulf Cooperation Council member states convened in the State of Kuwait for their first ever committee meeting, which provided the conferees with a valuable opportunity to share experiences and launch joint labour projects encompassing all 6 countries of the GCC. From the Sheraton Hotel, this is Sarah Glubb reporting for English News.
Saudi Foreign Minister Saud al-Faisal said today that the outbreak of violence in Iraq was a consequence of the Syrian civil war, which the international community has failed to put an end to. Al-Faisal held a news conference ending the meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Jeddah, during which he also dismissed claims that Saudi Arabia backs the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or the ISIL. Al-Faisal said that his country had designated the ISIL as a terrorist group.
It is a terrorist group. We have named it as a terrorist in the declaration of Saudi Arabia. We have put it squarely in the list of terrorist groups, so we don't think that it is part of a revolution reflecting the will of the Iraqi people. The way they found a place in Iraq to give them the presumption to think that they can be anything but terrorists is the actions of the government of Iraq that had established sectarianism, that has divided the Iraqi people, that has treated them unequally, that has subjugated some areas of Iraq through terrible punishment and vengeance because of their positions. The Prime Minister had collected all authority in his hand.
Iraqi government forces are battling with the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, for control of the country's biggest oil refinery. Officials insisted security forces were in full control of the Badr refinery north of the capital, Baghdad. However, trapped workers said militants were still inside the facility and that there continued to be sporadic clashes. The fighting comes as U.S. President Barack Obama considers a request for airstrikes against the militants. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, today called on the international community to have an attitude of compassion and solidarity towards Syrian refugees and the countries hosting them. Guterres made the remarks after visiting the homes of Syrian refugees in Khelda in Lebanon ahead of World Refugee Day on Friday. Guterres will be hosting a news conference on Friday in Beirut to launch the UN Refugee Agency's Global Trends Report covering displacements that occurred during 2013. The report is based on data gathered by the UN Refugee Agency, governments and non-governmental NGO partners. Israeli soldiers clashed with Palestinians during an arrest raid early today in Jenin in the West Bank. The military said about 300 Palestinians took to the streets when the soldiers entered Jenin in the early hours of the morning. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority condemned the latest Israeli plans for new settlements in Palestinian lands. From the West Bank, Fatma Abdel Karim has the details.
The sixth day of the Israeli military operation in the West Bank saw arrests of 30 Palestinians, including students, parliamentarians, former detainees and political activists from different parties. The arrests took place in Jenin, Nablus, Hebron, Bethlehem and Bir Zayt near Ramallah, where Israeli occupation forces raided into Bir Zayt University for the first time since it was established 90 years ago.
This is the most serious violation of human rights and rights to education. We thought such action were ended after the PA was established, but it seems there is no respect for higher education.
In Nablus and Jenin, Israeli special forces raided different buildings and carried out several arrests. In Hebron and Bethlehem, Israeli army vehicles besieged the cities and raided buildings and arrested dozens. Limited clashes took place overnight, and Israeli forces stormed into commercial stores and buildings and confiscated equipment, mainly surveillance cameras and recordings.
We are not allowed to, go outside our city. They confiscated many cameras of the Palestinian families, the Palestinian shops. Now we are without security cameras, which was protecting our homes and our shops. They attacked many families. They are searching houses. More than 800 houses were searched violently by the soldiers.
Over the past 6 days, Israel detained 300 Palestinians, at least 51 of whom were those released during the 2011 prisoners release deal between Hamas and Israel brokered by Egypt. But today, the military escalation continues beyond military action to more land grab. Israel approved the building of 172 settlement units in the controversial Har Homa settlement illegally built on lands between East Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Israeli officials said the units approved are spread out on a number of already constructed buildings. The Palestinian Authority condemned the decision and considered it a dangerous escalation.
Palestinian leadership has condemned these settlement activities, the new one and the oldest one. And we are trying to have international, not only condemnation, international steps in order to stop all this escalation.
No official reaction came out from any international side so far, although world powers consider settlement activity as unlawful. Fatma Abdelkarim, Kuwait TV, Ramallah, Palestine.
Spain's new king, Philippe VI, was proclaimed monarch at a formal ceremony in the country's parliament today, in a deliberately low-key ceremony in keeping with austere times. Philippe swore an oath of allegiance to democratic principles in front of lawmakers and senators who shouted "Viva el Rey," meaning in English, "Long live the king." Although the 18th century Spanish crown and the 17th century scepter were displayed next to the new monarch, the authorities shunned an opulent coronation ceremony. Earlier in his official act since ascending to the throne after midnight, Philippe received the red sash of Captain General of the Armed Forces from his father Juan Carlos, who signed his abdication decree in favor of Philippe yesterday. 4 Taliban militants struck a NATO post in the eastern Afghan province of Nangarhar today, destroying dozens of trucks and sparking a gun battle with police. Afghan officials said the attack took place in the parking base near a Torkham crossing on the Pakistani border near the Khyber Pass and the main supply route for NATO-led forces in landlocked Afghanistan. A spokesman for the provincial governor said one attacker blew himself up while police killed the other 3. He added that 37 trucks containing fuel and other supplies were destroyed in explosions set off by the attackers. Heavy fighting erupted between Ukrainian government forces and pro-Russian separatist rebels near the war-torn eastern town of Krasny Liman. News of the fighting came after President Petro Poroshenko talked of declaring a unilateral truce in the near future, adding today that Ukraine would sign a historic association agreement with the European Union on June the 27th. Meanwhile, NATO said Russia had moved troops back to the Ukrainian border, and NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said at least a few thousand soldiers had been deployed there in addition to existing forces. Poroshenko was elected president in May after 6 months of political turmoil, which saw his elected predecessor Viktor Yanukovych ousted after he refused at the last moment to sign the EU association agreement and advocated closer ties with Russia instead. And in local business news, Kuwait Stock Exchange ended today's trading session with the main indices in red zone. The WADE, the price and the KSX 15 indices were all down by 125.69 and 2.05 points respectively. Trades altogether came to 4,139 transactions worth about 23 million Kuwaiti dinars, with around 147 million shares changing hands. finally, checking on the World Cup news, 2010 winners Spain were knocked out of the tournament after losing 2-0 to Chile. In other matches, the Netherlands defeated Australia 3-2 and Croatia beat Cameroon 4-0. Tonight's match of the day is England versus Uruguay at 2300 hours Kuwait time. And Colombia against Ivory Coast has just kicked off, and Japan will take on Greece later on tonight. For a chance to see our reports again, please visit our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News. Well, with that, we conclude our news bulletin. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night. The State of Kuwait marks the 53rd anniversary of independence, remembering the day Kuwait gained full sovereignty. Saudi Foreign Minister Saud al-Faisal says the outbreak of violence in Iraq is a consequence of the Syrian civil war. The UNHCR calls on the international community to have compassion and solidarity towards Syrian refugees and the countries hosting them. And King Philippe VI is proclaimed Spain's head of state in a ceremony in the Spanish Parliament.